Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I'm your host, JP John Paz. Of course, with me is a very special guest, former Ring of Honor, two-time World Heavyweight Champion, former TNA Impact World Heavyweight Champion, three times over. You may know him as A Double. He is, of course, Austin Aries. Austin, welcome back to the two-man power trip. How you doing?
Good, John. Good, John. Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Yes, great to see you. What is going on in your world?
Just out here in Palm Springs at the moment. Took a little trip out to the West Coast to, just I like to travel. I don't like to stay in one spot too long. So enjoying some sun out here, some hot weather as we were just talking about, and yeah, all is good.
What about some wrestling stuff? Have you been wrestling lately?
Well, yeah. Contrary to some of the headlines I read this last week, I just did a podcast with Brian Hebner for his Reffing It Up podcast, and I always say after I do these podcasts, I wait to see what ridiculous headlines going to be created to get some clickbait. And so this time it was Austin Aries discusses life after being a wrestler. But I am still an active wrestler. I just had a show a few weeks ago in North Carolina, and the CYN brand, Control Your Narrative. We're getting ready to launch a 24 city tour here in the middle of October. So just working with these guys to put all that together. It's a big undertaking, but we're ready for it.
Was the headline that you're not wrestling anymore? Like, where did they get that from?
Well, so one of the question again that sometimes if we don't use context, it's easy to just create whatever narrative we want. So the question was about a tweet I put out that basically said something about, sometimes if you're struggling with the person you are, it's because you're holding on to the person you used to be, and not allowing yourself to be the person you're becoming. So I was just talking about where I'm at this point in my life where after 22 years of being a professional wrestler, I feel I'm in this place of transition. I still love wrestling. I'm still pretty good at it. But I do see that, there's other paths for me in my life. So we were just talking about that and talking about the time I did step away, a couple of years ago during, the COVID-19 pandemic. Wrestling kind of came to a shutdown, and it allowed me to really completely disconnect from the pro wrestling bubble, which I hadn't really done my whole adult life. So I just talked about that journey and trying to really find myself independent of the character Austin Aries and who I am as a human being. Right? We carry these labels and these characters we create for ourselves, and sometimes we can lose our sense of self. And so I was just talking about that journey and how I took about a year away, and really it was important for me to disconnect completely and really just rediscover who I was as a human. And so just that was really what I was talking about. But of course they take that out of context, and then the headline makes it sound like I'm no longer an active wrestler, which again couldn't really be any further from the truth. So but I get it. Sometimes out of sight, out of mind. I haven't been on any major network television. I've been wrestling more on the independents, doing a lot with the Control Your Narrative brand. But no, I haven't been on any of the major brands. So I get where for people who only follow WWE or AEW, that if you haven't seen me there, you may think that I've retired, but that's not the case.
So what's going on with CYN? Because I saw they had the tour, but you mentioned they're coming up with 24 city tour. But I saw they had one; it was canceled. I'm not sure if that was through whoever was helping you guys do it. So is it back on? Is the tour, or is it going to be announced? I guess really should say.
I mean, as far as the tour is going, as far as I know, could there be some dates along those 24 cities that may get altered? I mean, it's pro wrestling; these things happen. We are doing a lot of co-branding with a lot of the local promotions in these cities that we're going to be running. So, listen, for a relatively new promotion that doesn't have national television, this is a big undertaking to do a 20 plus city tour over 3 months. So there could be some hiccups in the road, but we're prepared for that. And like we always do in wrestling, you got to be nimble and you got to kind of go with the flow. And at the end of the day, we're excited for what we're going to be able to do. And co-branding, is great too. We've done that a couple shows already with some other promotions. Like I said, the North Carolina, we just did with AML, and it's a lot of fun. And to bring that brand to these promotions, and it creates some excitement for the fans, creates some excitement for the talent behind the scenes. And we're doing these seminars that have been really different than anything that I've really done, focusing a lot less on the in-ring stuff and more about really diving into who these people are as humans, what makes them tick, what their real story is, why they're doing this for a living, why they're pursuing this as their dream. And it tends to get a little emotional because when you start peeling back the layers and really, finding out people's real story, that's where we start to find some common ground. We've all had struggles, we've all had, things we've had to overcome. And I always say the pro wrestling business is, we're really trying to sell emotion. We're trying to pull emotion out of the fans. So if we can't tap into our own internal emotions, it makes it difficult to do that when the light comes on. So that's what we're really focusing on when we go around and do these seminars, and kind of creating that safe space for people to really share who they are, and be supported in that, and know that they have people around them that are going to support them, and in their authentic self.
When did you kind of like make the switch as far as like, 'cause obviously great wrestler, been a great wrestler, God, since I've seen you in the early 2000s, but it's almost like you're kind of making a switch to more character based, it seems like.
Well, I think that initial switch was kind of when I adopted the greatest man that ever lived moniker, which I still can't say it without like laughing. Like it was so tongue in cheek, right? Like it was never.
Yeah.
It makes me giggle every time someone calls me that, because it's like literally the most absurd thing you could call yourself. But that was the point at the time. Up until then, I had been known as the wrestling machine, the good match guy. And that's, I say, the hardest dollar to earn in pro wrestling, because, you're physically having to get people invested. So when you can have more depth to your character and you can add that element to it, it makes it so much easier. It gives you a lot more depth and opportunity to connect with people. So, I really think that was the initial, kind of foray into really trying to focus on the character aspect, because you realize is, okay, I'm a really good technical wrestler, but when there's guys like AJ Styles out there or Brian Danielson who are as good and better, you better find something that you can hang your hat on that's going to set you apart. And if you're just relying on the moves, that's difficult, because as we get older, that's the first thing that's going to go, is going to be our athletic ability and the capability to do some of those things that we could do when we were younger. So it was important for me to really dive into the other component and that character component of it, and figure that out. So, and it's always an evolution, and so I'm at this, I'm a completely different person now than I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And so I think, the best pro wrestling is when we can have some authenticity to it. We can pull from reality. And so I think that's the place I'm in now, just figuring out what that looks like at this stage in my career.
Do you think that when you do the seminars and stuff, like it is completely different than what you're used to? Because maybe it used to be all wrestling, now you're going into more of the character driven, character based stuff. I mean, is that completely different as far as doing like the seminars and stuff?
Not completely, because I did enough seminars as someone who was attending them early in my career to know where I got the most value. And very rarely was the most value by doing a bunch of drills in the ring or doing a bunch of arm drags or hip tosses or bumps. When I do seminars, I always tell the men and the women that this is their time. They paid for it. And if we want to get in the ring, we want to bump around, we want to do drills, we want to do, technical wrestling, we certainly can. But I feel like you have the opportunity to do that throughout the week, anytime you can get in the ring. But what you don't have the opportunity to do is pick the brain of somebody who's been doing it for 20 plus years. And so I always felt the most value was really more of a classroom style seminar, where we get to really sit and talk about why we're doing the things we're doing. I always say I can pretty much watch somebody circle around and lock up, and just based off the lockup, I can have a pretty good idea of how good they are in the ring, right? Just their body language, their presence, how they
Yep.
carry themselves. But now cut me a 30 or a 90-second promo and sell me on you and why I should pull my money out of my wallet to watch you, because we're all good wrestlers, we're all going to be the best, we're all tough. So what's going to make me gravitate to want to see you perform? What's going to make me connect to you emotionally as a performer? And that, most of the time has very little to do with the in-ring wrestling. And if you look at some of the biggest stars in the history of this industry, they weren't necessarily considered the best technical wrestlers. They were characters, or they had something about them that connected with the people. So, I want, when I do a seminar, I want, the people that attend that to walk away and feel like it was worth their time, it was worth their money. And for me, far and away, to sit and talk with people for a couple hours and really dive into the psychology of who they are as a person and try to figure out what makes them tick and how they can connect is always where that value is. And I'll give you an example. Some of the seminars we've done recently, we get a lot of the same kind of indie pro wrestling promos. And like I said, everyone wants to be the best, and everyone's the toughest, and everybody's going to beat you. But a lot of times, I always say we're not always the best actors in this industry. So the less you have to make stuff up and the more you can be real, the better off you're going to be. So I asked one guy, I said, what do you do? Like, what do you do for a living? And he said, oh, I'm a stay-at-home dad. I said, now there's something I haven't really heard much of. Do you know any stay-at-home dad pro wrestlers, Mr. Moms, so to speak? And he said, well, no, not really. I said, so maybe you should dive into that. I said, because right now we're in this world where it's all about creating content. I said, now you're at home with your son and you're doing things with your son, or you're doing a load of laundry. And if you film that, you're creating content for your pro wrestling character. You think it's hard to go to the gym, 5 days a week, 3 hours a day, try getting up at 6 a.m. every morning and changing diapers in between throwing loads of laundry and then making dinner, because that's real, because that's really who he is. And now when he started talking about that, he was no longer trying to portray this character, and it was so much more engaging and authentic and something I could connect to. And I said, that's where the money is. And so I think for a lot of us, we try to put on this character that we want to be as a pro wrestler, and we lose that authenticity of who we are as a person. And so, the more we can kind of keep trying to pull from that, it makes this so much easier, because again, we're not necessarily Academy Award winning actors and actresses. So the less you have to make things up, and the more you can really be authentic of who you really are, and then how that relates to pro wrestling, especially now, because you see, most pro wrestling fans, they're more interested in who the person is behind the scenes necessarily than they are as the character in the ring that they see, right? That's why the dirt sheets are so popular. We want to know what's going on in their real lives behind the scenes. And that's almost in every entertainment avenue. So, I think that's kind of, finding that in between is where the magic lies.
For sure. And the only other time I've heard Mr. Mom was Vince McMahon making fun of Scott Hall in '02. He's like,
Right.
no, I'm a stay-at-home dad now. He's like, all right, Mr. Mom, pal. He goes, you don't want to come back and reform the NWO? And obviously he comes back. But I remember him saying that for some reason Vince was like almost like a detrimental thing, like Mr. Mom. But obviously he was doing a good thing.
Sure, of course. So that's a tough job, man. Someone's got to do it. And if mom doesn't want to do it and dad doesn't want to do it, well, then what happens is the school system does it, which means your government's raising your kids, and they're telling them what they should think and believe, and that's a slippery slope.
Oh, big time, especially nowadays.
Especially nowadays.
Oh my God. But CYN, just explain to me like what exactly it is and like how you kind of got into it. Because I know it's Braun Strowman and EC3, but how did you kind of get in with those guys?
Well, first of all, what it is, I don't think we know yet. I mean, we do, but we don't. Listen, this really started out with EC3 reinventing himself after he left WWE for the second time, and probably being a little bit jaded about maybe some of the ways of the wrestling business has been, and wanted to kind of rebel and push back and kind of again control his narrative, and so it was really his creation for his own character, development and evolution. And it started to resonate with other people within the industry who felt similarly, right? When you're in this big corporate structure, a lot of times you don't control a lot of these things. You're told who you're going to be, where you're going to be positioned, what your value is, what your value isn't, what you're going to say, sometimes what you're going to wear, what you're going to do in the ring. And that can be difficult, And so I think that's where the original concept came from. And there was never this idea to have it become its own brand, its own touring promotion. It just kind of took a life of its own as it started to resonate with more and more performers, and more people were interested in being involved. It kind of developed into this. And for me, the same thing. I kind of watched from afar, and I was watching some of these promos that were being put out and some of the more theatrical videos and stuff that were being presented. And I thought it was something that was different. And, I had a good relationship with EC3 back when we worked together at Impact. I'd known Braun, with our time in WWE. He was down at NXT still when I started there. We're both from Wisconsin, so I was familiar with him as well. And I'd been down in Mexico for all of last year. Again, kind of mostly disconnected from wrestling. I started doing shows in the middle of last year, here and there. Ones that interested me that I wanted to be a part of. And I came back to Florida in January. And it was really just supposed to be a temporary kind of couple of month trip back before I went back to Mexico. And I saw that CYN was having a show in Orlando, and I hit up EC3 and said, "Hey, I'm in town. If you think that there's something there for me, something of value that I could bring to the table, let me know. I'm interested in what you're doing." And we quickly hopped on a phone call and just talked about some ideas and decided to give it a go. And so they announced me as doing that show, and of course certain vocal part of the internet lost their mind and got angry because in their mind I had been canceled or I was no longer wrestling. And when they saw this wasn't the case, they, I don't know if they thought they could like re-cancel me or something. To the credit of the hierarchy of CYN, they stuck by me. They weren't rattled by this small vocal minority. And and because again, that's kind of the whole premise of this, right? Like, it's okay to have a different opinion. It's okay to not agree with everybody on everything, but we can't live in an echo chamber. We have to learn to be able to sit down and have respectful discourse with people that we don't necessarily see eye to eye with, because that's the only way that we grow and learn as human beings, right? If we always surround ourselves with people who act and think just like us, then we never evolve and we never become better. And so, I had some real, honest, conversations with these guys about the things that were being said and written about me. And, they decided to not be rattled and to not be shaken by this controversy or this outrage. And, and I appreciated that because I've been in some other situations where that wasn't the case. And it said a lot to me about that they were serious about what they were saying. It wasn't just lip service, but this is, they wanted to create something where everyone was welcome and where they weren't going to necessarily feel like they had to bow to any certain ideology, any certain, population of the wrestling industry. It was for everybody. And, from there, it just kind of took a life of its own. Did the first couple of events. And, as it started to grow, they obviously we need kind of all hands on deck. And I've been doing this for a while and I'm pretty good in the ring, but I can do some other things outside the ring. So I've been excited to jump into that world a little bit with producing matches and helping with creative and dealing with talent and, doing these seminars and things of that sort. So, and here we are, now we got a, 20 plus city tour we're about to embark on and we're excited.
With that, like with the canceling stuff and like quote unquote controversies, where does that stem from? Is it the Christy Hemme stuff? Like, where are they coming from as far as them coming after you about it?
I think it's a combination of things, right? I think the Christy Hemme thing, that could be like where like a root of a lot of it is, right? And, looking back at that was almost like the beginning of the cancel culture. Like I did something in character, impromptu, to try to kind of just cover up a mistake my colleague made. And it was taken out of context and it was all of a sudden like Dan Sowell did this horrendous thing. Not understanding that what I did was I was every intention to be a jerk and it was supposed to be a bad guy doing a bad guy thing. This wasn't something I did in private, when the camera was off to admonish her. I wasn't, legitimately angry at her or anything of that sort. And that kind of took a life of its own because I remember, me and Christy talked once I knew there was any issue or she wasn't sure how to take it. And that was really her thing initially is she didn't know how to take it. We didn't really talk after it happened. To me, after it happened, I didn't think about it because nobody said anything. And it was, again, the red light's on. And, this is, yes, we do have things that we talk about beforehand, but a lot of the things we're doing in improv and in the moment. And that happens a lot in this industry. And that was one of those. And I just made a spur of the moment decision to try to get some heat off of this mistake And, I could have done a million different things. And the thing that I did made people feel uncomfortable. Once me and her spoke, we were good. I explained where my head was at the time. It was to be dismissive and be a jerk. There was nothing sexual about the interaction. I didn't look at her. I didn't shake my hips at her. It was just, um, you know, our respective heights made it as such that, she was in a bit of a compromising position for a couple of seconds. Um, After we spoke, there was no issue. I apologized if in the moment it made her feel any certain way. She respected, my apology. We had a good conversation. But then I was being asked to make a public apology. And at the time, I didn't understand why anybody but her needed an apology, right? She was the only opinion that mattered to me.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, people online, they're really upset. And I was like, well, wasn't that the point? Like, I'm a bad guy. Like, they're supposed to be angry. They're supposed to be upset. Of course, that wasn't a nice thing to do. That was the whole point of it, was to kind of take the heat off of her for making a mistake and put it on me, the bad guy. And I just didn't understand the mindset of why the public needed an apology, because the whole point of what I did was to make them mad at me. And so then, the word sexual harassment starts getting thrown out there by people. And again, it just took this life of its own. And I didn't really understand what was happening, because again, me and her had never had any issues previously. We never had any issues after that. And it was a difficult situation to go through, because what my intention was and then what was being said about me were completely night and day. And so I think, but the problem and why I pushed so hard against that was because once that label of sexual harassment is placed on you, whether it's warranted or not, that's really hard to shake. That's really hard to get rid of, right? Because we know nowadays people read a headline and they don't necessarily read the whole article or the whole story. Or if there's a correction or a retraction, they often don't see that, right? They just see the initial and then they form their opinion, and that's it. Once the opinion's formed, very rarely do people ever go back and form a new opinion, because then they'd have to admit they were wrong. And our egos don't like to admit that we're wrong very often. So I think that was that kind of set the table, right? Then you have the reports over the years of me being hard to work with, behind the scenes. And, is there some truth to that? Yeah, I'll own some of that, because I'm opinionated. I think that we should treat people a certain way, in the wrestling industry, as we know, hasn't always treated the performers in the best manner. The people that have run the show haven't always been the most upstanding human beings. They haven't always been the most honest. These are things I've had to navigate throughout my career. My issues in wrestling have very rarely, if ever, had anything to do with my standing in the company, wins or losses, title belts, anything like that. I've always pushed back against the way that they treat people, right? And the way the business is done. It's very rarely ever been about me or my own situation personally, as far as where I'm positioned creatively or anything like that. But I'm also someone who, I don't mind a good spirited debate, like, hey, let's, if you believe this strongly, I believe this strongly, let's hash it out. Let's talk about it, and I'm not afraid to be wrong. I'm not afraid to learn something new. But that's not always welcome. I always say, in a corporate setting, they don't like why sirs, they like yes sirs. They like good soldiers that just say yes sir and they do the job, and they don't question why they're doing that job. And I'm a bit of an inquisitive mind, so I've always had the question why. Well, why am I doing this? Because I want to understand why I'm doing it, so that I can learn, right? I can comprehend, and so that for the next time around, I have a better idea of why these things are happening. So you couple those things, then I was very outspoken early on during the COVID pandemic of my beliefs of what's happened, my beliefs about healthcare. My beliefs about the different measures that the government was taking. I'm not alone in those thoughts, but a lot of those people that had those opinions were censored very early on. They were ostracized. But as we've now gotten 2+ years into it, we see a lot of those people were right.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things they were saying were right on, but people didn't want to give them the credit. So, I got my head taken off, for a lot of the things I posted early on my social media about what was happening. And so, you couple that, and then, then again, go back to the Christy Hemme thing. You have the sexual harassment label. So then it's easy to start, bringing up other stories, surface, from a, example, Rhett Titus, student of mine, he did a shoot interview some years back. He talked about a scenario where his girlfriend was in the locker room, and I'll just say it, she kissed my balls. Like, what do you want me to tell you? It happened. I'm not going to run from the facts. The facts are she kissed my balls. She did it willingly. She did it, I would almost say, gleefully, maybe a little too gleefully, right? There's a whole story and context behind it. She was putting kisses on all the wrestlers with her lipstick. She didn't really belong in the locker room, but she was going to accompany him to the ring that night. And she was getting a little flirtatious in the locker room. And I kind of told her to kind of knock it off, cut it out. This isn't high school, that, she needs to act a certain way if she's going to be in here. And, I told her this isn't high school. And if you keep talking like that and acting like that, somebody's going to call your bluff. And, she said to me, well, who says I'm bluffing? And, my response, and maybe we can debate if it was the correct response or not, but my left testicle came out, and I said, well, put your money where your mouth is, expecting that at this point she would maybe realize that this was serious. And to my surprise, she actually kissed my testicle, and so I had to go show Rhett, like, hey man, you might want to corral your girl over here because she's acting a little inappropriate. So that story resurfaced, and then of course the headline is Austin Aries, forces woman to kiss his balls. Austin Aries admits to sexual assault, and like, well, but that's not what happened. Nobody was forced, nobody was coerced, nobody was pressured, nobody was tricked. She did this. She was an adult, and she made a choice to do this. And but again, you take all these things and people, wanting to believe a certain narrative about me. And so then that got mischaracterized as something that it wasn't. So you add all these things up, and I'm a terrible, terrible human being. Because even though we know pro wrestling isn't real, we know that Austin Aries is really a terrible human being in real life, even though most people have never met me in real life. So they have no idea who I am or who I'm not. They're basing it off of things they read on the internet, which may or may not be true, or may not come from a certain perspective that has a bias. But that's the world we live in. And so I've accepted that people are going to believe what they want about me. And it's no longer my job to try to change people's opinions, because that a lot of times ends up being futile, and you'll just drive yourself nuts because people are going to believe what they want to believe. And that's just the world we live in.
And if they don't like you and they hear that story with Rhett Titus' girlfriend, I mean, they're going to double down. You know what I mean? That's going to make them fire it up even more. They're going to double down on it.
They'll double down on it. And again, they'll take, and the wrestling, these different dirt sheets are good at taking something and creating a headline has a little bit of truth in it, but 2% truth in it. Again, I've never admitted to sexual assaulting anybody because I've never sexual assaulted a person in my life. I've never sexually harassed, assaulted, coerced, forced, pressured anything to any female or male in my entire life, not my career or my life. It's just not who I am as a person. And again, the headline came from not from this female speaking out about it. It was from, Rhett and Kenny recalling this time this happened, and then someone taking that story that was done for a shoot interview and then making it sound like this woman came out and said it, and that wasn't the case, and then characterizing as somehow I forced this woman to do something, which just wasn't true. And the whole point of that story was I always told my students, don't bring your girlfriends in the locker room, or girls, don't bring your boyfriends in the locker room. Like, we're working, there's locker room talk, people are getting changed. It's just not an environment where you bring your significant other, because nothing good is going to come of it. Right. And so that was, I made a comment like, my student learned a lesson in that moment. It was an unorthodox way for him to learn the lesson, but he learned why I said, don't bring your girlfriends in the locker room, because it's an environment where again, they don't belong and nothing good comes of it. And this was an example of that, and so, but again, you write a headline, people read it, and they take that and they run with it. And if you already don't like me and you already have these other things hanging over your head, it's easy to just attach it to you. And And again, that's why the Bound for Glory thing was so easy for people to believe, because I gave them exactly what they already thought they knew about me. And so, well, of course, they're all going to bite on this because this is exactly what they think I would do. And 4 years later, people are still insistent that, I was unprofessional and went into business for myself and all these different things that, again, I hate to break kayfabe, but it wasn't the truth, right? It just wasn't the truth.
I was going to ask you about that because that's obviously another controversy that they say that
Yeah,
you were.
and that's one really people, a lot of people too, still very, very angry at me about that. So unprofessional to no sell his move like that and get up the way I did and leave.
And point up to Ed Nordholm and Scott, I guess,
Yeah.
when and yeah.
Well, how do you know that I pointed up to them?
I was there, so I was just guessing
You-
that's where Ed was. I was like,
Sure.
so I was somewhere like near the first row, so I was like, he
Yeah.
must be pointing at Ed or something because I knew he was there because I
Well, I
knew
was really,
somebody that worked there that said all the major people were in
yeah,
attendance.
Don was up there. But this is the question I ask all the people: is how do they know that I did that? How did they know that I got up after a few seconds and no sold and flipped everybody off? How did they know? Because the camera was on me.
Well, yeah, well, that's true. That's
So
very
let
true.
me
Yeah,
ask you this question: if I really went into business for myself and none of that was planned, why would they keep the cameras on me? Why would they have the camera on me the whole time so you all got to watch it? Wouldn't they just cut the camera to Johnny and you never even saw that I was there? You never saw that
that's
I got
true.
up and walked to the back. You never saw that I flipped anybody off. They would have just kept the camera in the middle of the ring on Johnny Impact, the new champion.
Yeah, they would have. Yeah, definitely.
I would think so. There was a camera waiting for me backstage. As soon as I got through the curtain, I cursed out Scott. Why would there be a camera there waiting? Why would they even get that on video? See,
Very true.
these are the questions that the fans, and not even just the fans, but the workers in the business who also have commented about this over the years. It's like, if you're so smart to what we do, did you think about that when
Yeah,
you
the
when you are
cameras are perfectly in place. Yeah, exactly.
perfectly in place to see the whole interaction, right? If that was really going on, don't you think they would have cut the cameras and you never would have even known that I did that? I can't make them put me on camera, right?
Right. Yep.
But again, people are
Adds
going
to
to
the
believe
character. Yeah.
they're going to believe what they want to believe. So it doesn't matter. I could literally show you the text messages between me and John that we sent back and forth before Bound for Glory, after Bound for Glory. There was never any heat between us, right? The tweet I put out about his wife, all these things that we're completely in the know about. I mean, I'll be honest, John. I hate that I even have to expose all this because I am like very old school, that I appreciate the magic and the work of pro
Right.
wrestling.
Yep.
But it got to a point to where it's affected my career because people think I'm unprofessional, and honestly, it really might be the other way around. Like, I'm so committed to this craft, and the way that I broke in is where we're trying to create this illusion and blur the lines of reality. I didn't want to tell anybody. I would have loved for people to think this all was real. And if anybody announced a match between me and Morrison right now, do you not think there would be intrigue in that match 4 years later after that event?
Yep. People would bring up they got heat. They have heat. They would definitely say that.
So, for me, wrestling's about creating moments, and you can argue if it was the right move or not, but nobody will ever forget that match. I mean, people still talk about it to this day. Millions of people watched that clip the following week that probably had no idea that Impact Wrestling was a thing or that John Morrison was still wrestling. You know, that wasn't supposed to be the final act. There was the intention was always for me to. That was really just to keep the heat for the rematch because I thought we had people so invested that that rematch could be just as buzzworthy and people would be even more invested to see that. The rematch just never happened, and so therefore the story kind of took a different direction as far as what people thought happened, and they think that I was blackballed or I again went into business for myself. Just not the case.
Why no rematch?
Again, this is where my regret does come in, and I just talked about this on Brian's podcast. They put a contract offer on the table for me after Bound for Glory, a multi-year deal. and I just decided to pass on it. I was going through some other things in my personal life that I made a decision that it was best to not take that contract at the time. I was still interested and willing to have the rematch. I just didn't want to sign a multi-year deal just because I was working through some other stuff, and that was it. And so once I passed on the contract offer, I just never came back, and so therefore there was no rematch. It was definitely talked about. We discussed a couple of different scenarios where it could have happened. It just never came together.
I think that adds to the myth of the heat because there wasn't a rematch. Like, oh, they
Well,
must have heat. They wouldn't want to work together. Yeah.
yeah, or again, he was totally unprofessional, went into business for himself, so they decided to never use him again. And
Yep.
but the reality is, it was actually my decision not to come back. It wasn't their decision not to have me back. And again, I'm not one of these people who says, "Oh, I have no regrets in life." I don't carry those regrets because I believe everything brings me to the place I'm supposed to be right now, for whatever reason it might be. I don't always understand those reasons. But at the time, I made a decision that I wasn't in a place where I thought that was uh, the best thing for me. But looking back, especially with the way things played out and the perception that created, I do wish I would have taken that contract, if for nothing else, just to have that rematch, just so that the story ended differently than it did.
I mean, it was hot at the point too because people were interested. Like I said, a million people were watching. People were interested in Bound for Glory. Obviously, I mean that place was beyond sold out. It was like it was so crammed in there. It was it was ridiculous. I'm sure the fire department wouldn't have loved like how many people were crammed in there, but
Right.
there was interest for sure in that match.
Yeah, and it's not easy. Listen, in this day and age, it was, oh, well, kayfabe's dead, and I was extremely proud that, and I think John felt the same way. I don't want to speak for him, but just in our talk, in our discussions, that we show that it's not. You have to work the fans a little differently than we did in the '80s or the '70s, right? Because they are smart, but you can use what they think they know against them just as easily, right? And so that was the whole premise of that. We had really, people believing there was legitimate heat, and we weren't, working together and all these things. And obviously I knew that, like, let's be honest, if I would have laid there for 2 or 3 more seconds, or if I would have winced in pain just a little bit more, no controversy. No one talks about it.
Yep.
You have to step on the line or just a little bit over it, or people don't even acknowledge it. It's, again, the same with that tweet I put out that started all of it. I knew if I said certain words in that tweet, and as long as the context of me using those words wasn't derogatory or didn't cross the line, but just by saying these words, right, just by calling her husky, watch everybody lose their mind.
Yep.
And it was like, again, like, just Geppetto with the puppet strings, knowing how these people will react. And it's exactly what happened. But if you don't step on the line, and if you don't offend, then it never happened. It's like the tree that falls in the forest, and when nobody's around, nobody hears it, and nobody reacts. So again, that's that very difficult line that we try to walk, or that I've tried to walk as a heel performer, is, well, how do I get them to dislike me? And how far over the line do I need to go to elicit a real emotional reaction, not one of these, I'll use an example of, MJF, where I'll read a lot of the online sentiments. Oh, he's such a great bad guy. Well, if you're saying that, is he really that good of a bad guy? Because if you love him and you acknowledge and you realize he's just playing a part, and he's so good at being a bad guy, and you like him for his character,
That's
is
true.
he really a bad guy?
Yeah.
But conversely, if you Google my name, this guy's a huge piece of shit. He's a degenerate. He's an awful human being. And I'm like, now that's a good bad guy. Because these people have never sat in the living room with me and had a real conversation. They have no idea who Dan Sowald is. But man, they know Austin Aries. That guy's a terrible human being. And I'm thinking, man, like, I thought that was what I was trying to accomplish. But times have changed, culture's changed, pro wrestling's changed, and I come from a little bit of the old guard, and so maybe I was a little late to adjust to the times, and maybe it's cost me a little bit in some areas.
That is true on MJF because I think he's a great heel. I think he's doing a great job, but he's got so many fans. It's almost like, is he a heel? It's almost like he's like the anti-hero kind of vibe.
Or when you can readily acknowledge that, oh, but this guy's just playing that part. Well, then I haven't really blurred the lines, have I? And to me, wrestling, that's the beauty of this art form, is that we blur the lines and you don't know where reality stops and the fiction begins. And if you do, then I could argue that you're not as good of a magician as you think you are. And so I like to think I'm like the last real magician who can still pull off the magic trick, even though everybody knows the magic isn't real.
Now, and keeping in that too, the rant room. So when that guy went in there, he really hated you, right? I'm guessing that's why he wanted to go in there and say something.
So he didn't really hate me. He was actually a fan of mine, but he was very nervous to express how much he disagreed with my takes on COVID or vaccines or masks. Again, he came in there fully masked up, which, if that makes him feel better, I have no problem with that. Everyone do what you need to do to feel safe. We can argue the science and the statistics, but we all know that every study, every science, every statistic can be cherry picked to tell us what we want to hear. Right. And I always go with this at the end of the day, especially when people so passionately debate that they're right and somebody else is wrong. None of us know. None of us know anything. We see 0.005% of the light spectrum. We're literally blind. Right? The earth is a fraction of the size of a pinhead in the universe. Yet we think we're these, smart, intelligent, evolved beings. We're really not. We're dumb, we're deaf, and we're blind. But we're so convinced that we're not. So when people hold these truths, what is the truth? We don't know the truth. And my favorite saying and quote about myself is, I'm smart enough to know that I'm not smart enough to know. That's why I ask a lot of questions. Right. And that's why I leave all possibilities on the table. So you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, I leave all possibilities on the table because I don't know. But for you to sit there and say, well, that's just a stupid conspiracy theory. Well, now that's kind of arrogant and ignorant, because you're now alluding to the fact that somehow you got some book of the ultimate truth that I wasn't given. And that couldn't possibly be real. How do you know? We don't know anything. We're literally all taking educated guesses. It's like, this is the Truman Show. But it's like Truman never figured it out. And now we're like the great grandkids of Truman. And when you try to explain to people like, hey, like this is all kind of man-made bullshit at the end of the day. Our lives have been built on 99% lies, right? You go back and study Western medicine and allopathy and how we came to this consensus of the germ theory and what that was able to usher in as far as pharmaceutical drugs. Or you go back and look at the education system and who's funded it and, who's writing the curriculum that teachers are now teaching kids, right? If you don't go back and study these things, you have no idea how we got here. You just accept these things as truth. But what is truth? We don't know, right? How did the pyramids get built? Do we really know? No, we know what a book tells us in third grade, but we don't really know the truth. Somebody wrote that because that's what they wanted us to believe. But none of us know what the truth is. So I always tell, keep an open mind. Stop thinking your way is the only way and the right way, because honestly, none of us know shit about anything, right? So as far as this rant room goes, he was a fan of mine and he started with all the good stuff. And then there was there was this but that I could just tell he wanted to say but. And if I said, but what, man? Just spit it out. It's cool. I can take criticism. I don't mind a good debate. You think something I think is full of shit? Tell me. I'm not going to get offended. And so I think you really shouldn't say your opinions online so much. I said, okay, why? Well, I mean, he didn't have a good reason. And it's like, hey, it's okay. Not everyone's going to agree with me. And I know that when you're outspoken, you open yourself up to criticism. You open yourself up to people who want to dunk on you and, call you names and all these different things. That's all right. I don't mind. For whatever reason, that's why I was put on this earth in this form in this lifetime. Right. I'm wired that way. I'll take it. I'm strong enough to handle it. And so no, it wasn't like some fan. And I think that was kind of the whole point of the rant room is, how many of you who sit on your computers saying all these nasty negative things about someone you've never met and never been face to face with would be willing to have that same energy when you're in a room with them? And very, very few people do, and so it's something to think about, when you're spewing these things online, would you say that to somebody if they were sitting next to you. And so it was this opportunity to get, hey, if you have something that you feel that strongly about, that you really want to get off your chest, I'm man enough to sit in front of you and let you say it, and let you say it without yelling back at you. You paid for the ticket. You paid for this time. Say what you need to say. I'm man enough to hear it. It's not going to bother me. And who knows? Maybe something you say sparks something in my brain and makes me go, that's an interesting point. And then maybe I reevaluate my opinion and I come up with a different idea after that. And I go, I learned something today. That's a good day, So that's kind of what it was originally in its form. I think that the rant room is gonna morph and evolve into something even greater, to where it can be an idea where it's not about necessarily having to spew negativity and hate, but if you want to really have an in-depth, real conversation about something you're feeling inside, a problem you're having, whatever it might be, that you have the opportunity to have a safe place where you can be authentic, you can be real, and you can say whatever's in your heart without being judged and without being lashed at. And I think that's the big problem in our society right now. A lot of people are afraid to say what they really feel and think because of the backlash, because of the monkey mind, because of the pile-on mentality, that if someone doesn't say something that fits the current narrative, then they're going to get jumped on and they're going to get piled on by all these people. And we want to create an environment where that's not the case, where people can speak freely. And even if it's something that maybe someone else doesn't agree with, it's okay. We can have a conversation about it without calling names, without throwing, you're anti this, you're a phobic that, and let people actually, encourage people to have the courage to speak from their heart and speak their mind without the repercussions of being slammed back and piled on and called out and canceled.
Got another, I guess not controversy, but strange. WrestleMania 33, you versus Neville pre-show. Why pre-show? Why not on the main show? Any idea?
Not the pre-show, the kickoff show. I was corrected on that 100 times leading up to it. It's not the pre-show, it's the kickoff show, because semantics matter sometimes. I have no idea. I mean, listen, is 205 Live still around?
No.
Okay. Well, for as much as they talked about wanting to build this brand and have it be its own standalone entity, the things that they did with it didn't necessarily match that. So, I don't know why they put it in the position they did. I would just say because, hey, there's so much great talent there, and there's only so many hours for WrestleMania. You can't possibly put everybody on the main show. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I didn't take it as a slight personally. I had no issue with it personally. I was so grateful and excited to walk out in front of 70,000 people for WrestleMania at 38 years old, after I've been told no so many times over my career because I wasn't big enough, because I was too old, whatever the case may be, that I actually had somehow manifested this on my own in a lot of ways, to be able to walk out that ramp in front of 70,000 people who were in their seats, ready to watch what they thought might be the best match of the night. And I had been to other WrestleManias, and a lot of times people were still trickling in the stadium. They weren't in their seat. They weren't ready because they weren't afraid they were going to miss anything special. But, I think we both took some pride that, man, this place is pretty full already, and people are ready for this match, and they're excited for this match. But again, the people who make those decisions, above my pay grade. I thought it was a missed opportunity, though, to show the fans in the WWE universe that the 205 Live brand mattered and that it was important. They could have gave that brand a better position on that card if they really wanted to highlight it, if they really wanted to spotlight it, because I think that everybody had to know that we were going to go out there and deliver a great match and a quality match that would have fit anywhere on that card. And so I thought that, my only disappointment would have been if they were serious about making 205 Live into its own important entity, they weren't showing people by putting it in the position they did.
Yeah, for sure. But it was always like a funny thing. It's like, wow, you got Neville, you got Aries. They're going to knock it out of the park. It's going to be awesome. We can't wait for TNA show. And it's like, it's on the kickoff show. It's kind of like as a fan, it's like, it's kind of a shitty because we were expecting you guys to be on the main show.
I think, and that's the point, is I think it meant more of it meant more to the fans in a negative aspect than I think it maybe did to. I know it for me personally. Like, I wasn't boo boo faced, or I wasn't, upset about it. I mean, I was just grateful that, like, how many people never even get to be on a kickoff show that go through that company that are there for years and years and years. I'd only been there 18 months, so like I was extremely proud and excited to be walking out there. But yeah, I think to the fans, because they understood what that meant. They're putting them on this. They don't really care about these guys, right? And listen, the cruiserweights have always been positioned as the undercards, right? Despite the fact that in every other combat sport, usually the guys that sell the tickets are the smaller weights. Again, Conor McGregor's not a heavyweight, you know.
Nope.
If you really look at a lot of the money matches over the years, these weren't the heavyweights that sold the tickets. So, but only in pro wrestling because of certain people and what they liked. And again, listen, I always said this: it's Vince McMahon's, it's his promotion. He's paying everybody, and he has a preference of what he likes and doesn't like. I'm okay with that. If I don't like it, I'll start my own wrestling promotion and do it the way I want. But until I'm in that position, I can't sit here and bitch and moan. I just have to understand that's how it is, and play with the cards that I'm dealt. And I thought we did that. We went out there, and I took it again. I was a baseball player growing up. I was a leadoff hitter. Was I angry that I wasn't batting cleanup? No, my job was to go out there and set the tone, set the table. And so that's the way I looked at it. There's a few very important, positions on the card. And first is a very important position because you set the tone for the night, right? Obviously, your main event is always going to get the spotlight, but that first match is very important. And so I understood that. And it's like, well, we're going to set the bar here. And now we're going to challenge everybody else to exceed that bar. And, to the fans in the stadium, they didn't know where the main show started or where the kickoff show, ended and the main show started because they were there for all of it. They didn't. It's not like they didn't see the pre-show matches, any differently than the main show matches. There was one big card of wrestling. So for those 70,000 people, that match was extremely important. And I thought we went out there and did a hell of a job.
Yeah, great match. It's one of those things where it's like as a fan, you're like, damn, that should have been on the show. But like you said, more to us than to you guys. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. With just the landscape of your career, I just wanted to go back because I love this Ring of Honor, early 2000s. I mean, this is like my bread and butter because WWE at this point, I mean, not a fan. It was really lacking. It was struggling. Generation Next starts, and I was just
Yeah.
talking to Jack Evans about it. He said you guys were so different, but when you came together, you just didn't know like where ROH was going because of our video controversy.
Yeah.
It's like Samoa Joe's leaving, Daniels is leaving, so all the pressure is on you guys. Home run. I mean, speaking
Yeah.
of maybe a leadoff hitter with the Ricky Henderson style leading off with a home run, but man, Gen Next killed it for Ring of Honor.
Yeah. I think it's one of those cases where sometimes like ignorance is bliss, and we were all so fresh and new at that time in our careers that I don't even think like that pressure really was even enter the equation. I don't think we even understood the gravity. I don't think it was until a couple of years later where Gabe really told me like, hey man, like if you guys wouldn't have succeeded, like I don't know if the company would have stayed in business because they were in such influx and they really needed some new stars, and they just gave us the ball, and Gabe didn't know what was going to happen. And yeah, we gelled and it worked, and thankfully it worked, and it helped Ring of Honor in the process to kind of create this new generation of stars and new storylines. But I don't think at the time, like for all of us, it was like, oh man, like we all been working hard to just have an opportunity in this company because this is kind of the new hot thing and the place that you can get seen and catapult your career. But I don't think any of us really understood the gravity of like, oh man, there's a lot of pressure on us to go out here tonight and do X, Y, or Z. We just kind of went out and did our thing, and I think it was good that we were so different because we all brought something a little different to the table, which, I always think a good team does. It's like, we all filled in the gaps where the other guys didn't. Jack was such a unique in-ring performer, and then also like he kind of brought that hip-hop flavor that the rest of us didn't really have. Shelly's so technical, and intelligent in his way. Roderick kind of the bruiser who's break your back 150 different ways, and I'm just kind of this hybrid guy who was a little older than everybody that just kind of brought this different aura than the other guys did, and it worked, and thankfully it did. And we've all gone off to have, amazing careers, and it's kind of cool that that's where it all started.
Man, and I know I talked about this with you last time, but I was at Final Battle 04 when you beat Samoa Joe for the title. nobody I felt like thought you were going to win just because Joe was running through everybody. He's just dominant champion, man. But you're on your edge of the seat as you kick him in the head, and and you're about to do the fourth. I mean, the crowd's getting into it, but I don't know if you remember this. Gabe like jumps out and goes nuts. So like the booker of the show, the guy running the show, because the crowd was so into it, like he got invested in you beating
Yeah,
Samoa Joe for the title. And I feel like, I mean, talk about another home run. That was a home run because Joe was the franchise. Like, oh shit, Joe is the man here. Like if somebody beats him, how's the crowd going to react? They
right.
react exactly how he wanted them to react.
Yeah, I mean, he put a lot of trust, and he gambled and put me in that position, because if it had fallen flat, or it had kind of been a dud, this whole amazing run and everything that Joe had done for that title wouldn't have really paid off the way that it should have, right? And so, I've gone back and watched that match recently, and I was like, man, I was so green, and like, thank you, Joe, for like really, carrying a lot of that match, because I was just doing the best I could for my experience level at the time. Um, but yeah, I think that we even structured that match, and the whole idea was to kind of have that match feel like just another Samoa Joe title defense, one of these ones that you just kind of get through to the next guy. And so the way that whole match was structured from the beginning kind of felt like that. And then there was this moment, and I remember thinking, when, I was like, there's no one move I'm going to hit on this guy that's going to beat him. What I need is a moment, a small crack that opens up to where I can hit this flurry of moves in succession to have a chance to beat this guy who's been unstoppable. And that was it. He had me up for the muscle buster, and it looked like it was going to be the finish. And I was able to slip down his back and hit that crucifix driver, which, that created that moment. And then it was this quick flurry of the forearm. And then, I kicked him in his shin. That got him to his knee. Then I put that kick to his face. And like that moment where people went, oh shit. And then it was like the brain buster. And then people were like, is this really going to happen? And then, climb to the top and hit that 450. And, going back and watching, it was like, it's a cool thing when you can kind of see something in the back in your head of how you think they should react or respond. And then in the moment while you're doing it, you're like, yes, this is exactly what I hoped they would do. We're getting the exact reaction we wanted, and we executed, and it created that moment that, will kind of live in history of Ring of Honor and pro wrestling.
That was crazy because like you're almost like as you're going through that sequence, I remember like moving closer to the edge of my seat, closer. I'm on the bleachers, but it's like you're closer, closer. Like no way, no way. And it's like, oh, I can't believe that happened. I mean, just utter shock. But the crowd was nuts. I mean,
Yeah.
it was also like you said. You had them in the palm of your hands. It was such a great moment for Ring of Honor.
Yeah. Well, and it just goes to show too, is, a lot of times wrestling can be so predictable, so paint by numbers. And so a lot of the smart fans who watch it, it's like, we already kind of know what's going to happen before it happens. So when you throw that curveball and you can give people the unexpected, it shows, it creates these real authentic moments of emotion. And for me, that's the best part of wrestling, is taking people on that emotional roller coaster. And I think it's something I've always tried to do, and it's helped me in my wrestling career, is go, what can I do that they haven't seen? What can I do that they're not going to expect? What can I do that they couldn't predict? And so a lot of my moments, is trying to create moments. Again, going back to Bound for Glory, like, what can I do they're not going to expect? What can I do that they're going to go, wait, what just happened? Because a lot of times, it's always, I want to do something different. We know that, A, B, and C works, but let me give them, G, F, and Q. And they're like, wait a minute, those letters don't go in that order. It's like, well, they do now, and it worked, because you were expecting something, and I give you something different. And then that's what creates this thing of like, hey, I want to go see Austin Aries wrestle, because I never know what I'm going to see. It's unpredictable. I know I'm going to see a good match. I know he's going to work his ass off, but he always gives me something different that nobody else does. And so that's where my brain's always been when I go out there and perform.
As we hit the wind down, we head towards the finish here. That's great though, to be unpredictable. I mean, I love that, and kind of give them something that they're not expecting. But what's next for you? What's coming up?
Really just, enjoying life, man. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I think sometimes we get so caught up, and I know I have in my career, right? We get so caught up in our accomplishments, things, whether it's houses or vehicles or status, you know, we get so focused on the destination and we forget to enjoy the journey. And I think, if anything, what the last 2.5 years taught me is everything can change like this, and the things that you held true yesterday, all of a sudden the rules change and they're no longer true. So I've really challenged myself the last couple of years to really be in the moment and enjoy today, be grateful for today. Every day I wake up, my job is to be happy, because a lot of times we forgo happiness for all these false, things that we chase that we think are going to make us happy. We accomplish those things, and then we realize, oh, that's not it. That's not the thing that makes me happy. So, from a personal standpoint, that's my focus. From a wrestling standpoint, I'm going to keep helping the Control Your Narrative brand. Excited to do more work behind the scenes, something I've been interested in for a long time. We've taken a big bite of the apple with this tour. It's going to be a lot of moving pieces. So right now it's really just focusing on that. And then just let life come to me and figure it out as it goes, go with the flow. Don't get too overly attached to any certain outcome. I think that's something that maybe plagued me in my wrestling career, and something that I kind of warn younger wrestlers about is we get too attached to a storyline. We get too attached to a character idea, to a move, to something we want to do in a promo. And these things change. And if you're too attached to these things, that when they change, it can affect you, right? It can make you upset. It can make you angry, right? So there's a good saying, I think, I pulled from Tony Robbins, instead of having expectations, have preferences, things that you prefer happen, but not that you expect to happen. And when you change your expectations to preferences, then you're not as let down if it doesn't happen exactly the way that you wanted it to happen. So that's kind of where I'm at in my life. I've still got a lot left in the tank. I'm just being very judicious about where I spend it. I'm not necessarily looking to go anywhere full time and go back into that grind. But again, I'm always open to listen to offers and opportunities. But right now, Control Your Narratives offer me a great opportunity to be myself, to bring what I bring to the table, and to help, some of these younger talents, get to where they want to be, and that's kind of where I'm at in my career. I've had my run. I've been successful. I've done everything more than I ever wanted to do. And so now I'm interested in being able to help these younger performers figure out what they need to do to get to where they want to go, but do it in a way to where they value the journey, not just the destination.
That's so right. And expectations. Literally yesterday, my buddy was saying that because I saying like, did somebody piss me off? And he's like, why? And I was like, I was expecting them to do this.
Yeah.
And he goes, you shouldn't expect. He goes, that's why you're mad. He goes, you're mad at yourself for expecting them. Yeah.
Yep.
So very true.
We have all these rules. Well, you're supposed to do this. Well, there's no supposed to. There's a supposed to in your mind, but that's not the same supposed to in somebody else's mind. Well, you're supposed to hold those doors open for people. Well, I mean, you could debate that. I mean, but there's no like golden rule. So yes, like I should do that because it makes me feel better as a human being to be kind and open a door for somebody else. But because somebody else doesn't open the door for me, that doesn't mean I should be angry at them because they might have a different supposed to in their mind, right? And so this is the things that I'm always reminding myself. Or again, when you're driving, don't take it personally. That this person didn't get up in the morning and go, I'm going to screw up Austin Aries' day by driving 5 miles below the speed limit in the right lane, or in the left lane. It's like, don't take it personally. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know their situation, and they aren't going out of their way to make your life more difficult. Life's difficult for all of us. We're all dealing with things, ebbs and flows, ups and downs. We're all just trying to get through this life, this puzzle that we can't seem to figure out. Sometimes we're jamming the wrong pieces in the wrong places. We get frustrated, so it's like, keep that in mind that we're all going through that. And so the more we can help everybody else, and be kind to them and have that compassion and try to lead with understanding and less judgment, the better off we're going to be.
Very, very true. Well said. Where can everybody follow you, social media and otherwise?
Well, you can go to the cesspool of Twitter and find me at Austin Aries. You can also go to my Instagram at Austin Healy Aries. I post more of, food stuff and pictures and things of that sort, a little less wrestling on there. I find it to be a little less toxic. And those are the main two places to follow me and everything that's going on. And if you're interested in getting a copy of my book, Food Fight, they're still available at my Pro Wrestling Tee store. Go to pwtees.com, search for Austin Aries, and you'll find all the goodies there.
Nice. Great stuff, Austin. Thank you for coming on once again. Really appreciate all the time.
Thank you, John. Now I can't wait to see what salacious headline we're going to see in the next few days.
Yep.
That degenerate Austin Aries, awful human
That's
being.
true. Yep.
Yeah.
Wait for it. Yep. That's true. But thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, man. You have a good night.